I'm going to tell you all about the history of our beloved hero Link in order to clear up any sort of confusion so that when Breath of the Wild 2 actually releases, we all can enjoy the game with a clear conscience. Let's get started. How's it going? I'm Derek with Zelda Theory and welcome to another video. Hey, if this is your first time here and you love the Zelda series and you find some value here today, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss our Zelda conversations. Super honored to have you a part of the family. So I think it's safe to say that the Zelda series as a whole is pretty confusing to the masses. While Breath of the Wild 2 will be using the same version of Link, Link as a general character is still a contributing factor to why the franchise can be confusing to people. I mean, how many different incarnations of Link are there exactly? A lot. Again, the point of this video is to try and simplify things for you so that when the sequel does finally drop, whenever that is, you will be able to understand the Link you are controlling in the sequel. Sound like a plan? Let's dive in. Although Link from the Legend of Zelda series is one of the most recognizable characters ever, with his typically green tunic, his elf ears, and his iconic scabbard carrying the legendary Master Sword, it's still easy to forget the fact that each new Zelda game sometimes brings with it a refresh of all the central characters as fans know them. Indeed, Link, Zelda, and Ganon/Ganondorf all have several iterations or reincarnations that represent different points and eras in the Legend of Zelda timeline. That isn't to say that the different versions of these characters have never made it outside their first game though. While Nintendo does enjoy refreshing these characters with a new game every now and then, Zelda games that have served as sequels typically carry over the same characters from the preceding title, which is the case for the upcoming sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. With the second Breath of the Wild coming out eventually, it's worth taking a look at how Link got to this point, with a retrospective that analyzes the many versions of Link throughout the iconic Nintendo franchise. Here is a history of Link, as presented by the official timeline of The Legend of Zelda. The very first appearance of Link on the official Legend of Zelda timeline is from Skyward Sword. In the game, Link is known to be a knight who has trained above the clouds on the floating island of Skyloft for as long as he can remember. Interestingly, while Link and Zelda have had a somewhat vaguely romantic relationship throughout the entirety of the series, they're usually painted as just a princess with her bodyguard. In Skyward Sword, however, it seemed that Link actually loves her as more than just someone he's trying to protect, which motivates him to rescue her in the game. Skyward Sword's Link also appears to be on the taller side compared to the other reincarnations of Link throughout the series, especially Link from Breath of the Wild. This could be due to the fact that he's from Skyloft. As the taller one is, the easier they can potentially maneuver around the clouds. He is also able to masterfully pilot Loftwings, which are the giant birds of the game. Link from the Minish Cap in Four Swords, on the other hand, is tiny by literally anyone else's standards. The Minish Cap and Four Swords are another pair of games in which the character from the first game appeared in the second, with no Nintendo style refresh mixing things up. In these games, Link is part of the Minish people called the Picori by the Hylians, which are tiny mice-like people that inhabit the grasslands and various aspects of the forest. Although he's the smallest Link of the franchise, he might also be the most powerful among them, at least in terms of weight versus power. In his shrunken state, Link is able to dodge raindrops, destroy the body parts of bigger enemies, and can even lift objects that are several times his size. The most recognizable iteration of Link though comes from Ocarina of Time, which falls at the base of the fork that splits the Legend of Zelda timeline into three separate lines. The Hero of Time, as he is generally referred to, has two forms in the game, Young Link and Adult Link. After Link removes the Master Sword from the pedestal of time, he awakens 7 years later to find Hyrule in the grip of the evil Ganondorf. Traveling in between childhood and adulthood, Link must stop Ganondorf's evil ways once and for all, but the timeline shows how he might have failed. There are a series of Legend of Zelda games that take place specifically after the alternate timeline where Link is defeated by Ganondorf, starting with A Link to the Past. This version of Link appears to be the most experienced of them, as he is the protagonist of 4 Zelda games. A Link to the Past, Oracle of Seasons and Ages, and Link's Awakening. Due to him being in all of these games, he has more than likely defeated the most number of enemies and bosses in comparison to the other versions of Link, and is therefore arguably the wisest. Taking place after those games are the original Legend of Zelda games for the NES, The Legend of Zelda and The Adventure of Link. Interestingly, these two games mark the only time when a character is reincarnated with the release of a direct sequel. In the two games, Link ends up saving two different versions of Princess Zelda, once when she was kidnapped by Ganon, and the second being when she was put into a deep slumber by the magician hired by the Prince of Hyrule. This is also who sets the decree that all women born into the royal family Hyrule must bear the name Zelda. There are two timelines that follow the success of the Hero of Time after he defeats Ganondorf, the child and adult timeline. In the child timeline, after the events of Ocarina of Time, young Link goes on to start the events of Majora's Mask, which is arguably one of the best in the series, where he must utilize different masks in order to shapeshift into more capable forms, thus helping the area of Termina from impending destruction by the angry-faced moon that gave much of us nightmares when we were little. Interestingly, after the events of the game, young Link leaves Termina never to be heard from again. His spirit would later then transform into the Hero Shade found in Twilight Princess. In that game, it's confirmed that young Link died and became the Hero Shade when the Link of that game meets with him. Twilight Princess Link is also very strong, like the other versions of him, as he was able to lift a giant Goron with relative ease. Four Swords Adventures takes place 100 years after Twilight Princess and features Link in a similar fashion as the one found in the original Four Swords. The adult timeline is where Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks take place. While all three games feature the same cel-shaded style of Link, only the first two games feature the same characters. Spirit Tracks actually does take place 100 years after the first two games. Wind Waker introduces the Hero of Winds and is likely the strongest version of Link yet. Link and Zelda in these games have a more platonic relationship than in previous games. Nintendo has stated, however, that Breath of the Wild fits under every single timeline that we've discussed in this video, but Breath of the Wild 2 is bound to reveal more definitive information. The Hero of the Wild is clearly the most well-traveled and has more of a personality than the previous versions of Link. But he also wouldn't exist without Nintendo constantly reshaping how the character looks and feels. Until Breath of the Wild 2 comes out, this is pretty much everything that is currently known about the iconic hero, Link. So hey, if you guys found value in this video and you want to see more Breath of the Wild 2 videos or Zelda content in general, click on the playlist coming on the screen now. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you over on another video.